They looked at Britain on the map, a narrow island, cold, wind-battered, separated from Europe by a thin stretch of water. They saw no massive population, no endless manpower, no vast land army like France or Austria, and they believed Britain could be contained. They believed distance would protect them, that oceans were barriers, that jungles, deserts, and mountains would stop a foreign power from ruling their lands. They believed empire required numbers. They believed empire required proximity. They believed empire required brute force, and that belief would cost them their independence. Because Britain did not conquer the world by fighting harder. It conquered the world by thinking differently. Britain did not begin as a conqueror. It began as prey, invaded by Romans, raided by Vikings, conquered by Normans. For centuries, Britain was not a power. It was a prize. This created a national instinct. Survival through adaptation. British leaders understood early that fighting Europe head-on was suicide. France could raise larger armies. Spain had greater wealth. The Holy Roman Empire had depth and manpower. Britain had none of these advantages, so it searched for a different path. Britain's geography became its greatest weapon. The sea was not a moat. It was a highway. If Britain controlled the oceans, it could choose its wars, choose its enemies, choose its timing. This belief reshaped British military doctrine entirely. While continental powers built fortresses, Britain built dockyards. While others drilled mass infantry, Britain trained sailors. The Royal Navy became the backbone of survival, not glory. Survival. British naval doctrine emphasized permanent fleets, global bases, relentless patrols. Standardized ships were repaired, not abandoned. Crews were professionals, not levies. This allowed Britain to do something revolutionary. Fight wars without committing armies, blockade instead of invade, strangle trade instead of storm cities, victory without occupation. Enemies bled economically while Britain remained protected by water. Britain learned another lesson early. Let others fight the bloodiest battles. Britain would fund them, arm them, supply them, and intervene only when necessary. This strategy would define British warfare for centuries. Gold replaced manpower. Subsidies replaced sacrifice. It was not cowardice, it was calculation. Britain's most dangerous innovation was not military, it was financial. The creation of a stable national debt system, the Bank of England. Reliable taxation, long-term borrowing. This allowed Britain to fight wars longer than any rival. France often won battles. Spain won glory. Britain won endurance. Wars are not won by courage alone. They are won by who can afford to keep fighting. British expansion began quietly. Trading posts, chartered companies, naval protection for merchants. Unlike Spain, Britain did not conquer immediately. It inserted itself economically first, then politically, then militarily. By the time resistance formed, British influence was already embedded. Nothing symbolizes Britain's method better than the East India Company, a corporation with its own army, its own navy, its own diplomacy. Local rulers underestimated it. They saw traders, not conquerors. They saw contracts, not cannons. That mistake would cost them everything. British forces in India were tiny compared to local armies, but they were disciplined, uniformly trained, artillery-focused, logistically supplied by sea. Battles like Plassey showed the new reality of warfare. Numbers mattered less than coordination. Tradition mattered less than doctrine. This was empire, built by systems, not savagery. By the mid-18th century, Britain stood at a crossroads, still vulnerable, still contested, still underestimated. Then came the war that changed everything. A war fought on every continent. A war where Britain would prove its method worked. A war known as the 7 Years' War. And this is where Britain stops being a regional power and becomes a global empire. By the middle of the 18th century, war had changed. No longer confined to borders, no longer limited to dynasties. This war would be fought in Europe, North America, the Caribbean, Africa, and the Sea. The 7 Years' War was not just another conflict. It was the first true global war. And Britain understood something its rivals did not. This war would not be decided by a single battlefield. It would be decided by supply lines, by sea control, by endurance. On the European continent, Britain refused to play the traditional game. It avoided massive land commitments. Instead, it subsidized allies. Prussia fought. Austria bled. France exhorted itself. British gold flowed steadily. This allowed Britain to conserve manpower while enemies burned theirs away. While Europe focused on armies, Britain focused on oceans. The Royal Navy expanded relentlessly. Dockyards ran day and night. Crews were trained to standard procedures. Signals were drilled. Repairs were systematized. British ships didn't just fight, they stayed operational. French fleets were defeated not just by cannon fire, but by logistics. Unable to resupply, unable to coordinate, unable to protect colonies. In North America, Britain faced France's colonial empire. The French had rivers, forts, alliances with native tribes. But Britain had ships, and ships meant reinforcements. Supplies, artillery. The siege of Quebec revealed the new reality of war. Control. Control the war. When Quebec fell, French power in North America collapsed. Britain didn't just win territory, it eliminated a rival empire. While Europe fought kings' wars, India was decided by merchants. The East India Company maneuvered diplomatically, bribed where necessary, threatened where possible, fought decisively when required. Indian states underestimated British resolve. They mistook limited numbers for weakness, but British forces operated as unified systems. Infantry, artillery, logistics coordinated with precision. Victory followed discipline, not numbers. When the 7 Years' War ended, Britain emerged, transformed. Canada, India, Caribbean dominance, global naval supremacy. Britain had not conquered through mass slaughter. It conquered through system superiority. But empire carries a cost, and the next challenge would come from within the empire itself. The loss of the American colonies shocked Britain, but it did not break it. Britain learned a critical lesson. Colonies could not simply be controlled by force. They required alignment of interests. Administration mattered. Governance mattered. From this failure, Britain adapted again. While rivals stagnated, Britain industrialized. Factories replaced workshops. Mass production replaced artisanal supply. Iron replaced wood. Coal replaced muscle. This transformed warfare. Weapons were standardized. Uniforms mass-produced. Ships built faster than they could be sunk. Britain could now wage wars at industrial scale. Following early victories, Britain tightened control. Railways were built not for development, but for troop movement. Telegraphs shortened command delays. Doctrine emphasized rapid response to rebellion. Local armies were reorganized under British command. Empire was now administrative, not just military. In Africa, Britain again avoided full conquest at first. Ports, trade routes, naval bases controlled the coast, and the interior follows. Resistance was met selectively, brutally when necessary, but always calculated. By the 19th century, Britain's empire functioned like a machine. Raw materials flowed inward, manufactured goods flowed outward. Naval bases protected routes, local elites were co-opted. Rebellions were isolated and crushed. This was empire by management, not chaos. Yet cracks appeared. The empire was vast, expensive, increasingly difficult to defend everywhere at once. Rivals studied British methods. Germany, Japan, the United States. They learned fast. By the late 19th century, Britain still ruled vast lands, but dominance was no longer guaranteed. Industrial parity emerged. Naval supremacy faced challengers. The system that built the empire now strained under its weight. The final test was coming. By the dawn of the 20th century, Britain ruled an empire on which the sun never set. 1/4 of the world's land, 1/5 of its population, sea lanes, coaling stations, choke points, colonies woven into a single global system. But beneath the surface, the age of effortless dominance was ending. The world Britain had mastered was changing faster than Britain itself. Germany industrialized at a speed Britain could not match. The United States surpassed British steel output. Japan adopted Western doctrine with ruthless efficiency. For the first time in centuries, Britain faced competitors who understood its system and were capable of copying it. Naval supremacy, once absolute, now had limits. The Royal Navy expanded again, but the margin of safety shrank. Every new battleship launched by Britain demanded 2 more to stay ahead. The empire was becoming expensive to maintain. In 1914, Britain entered a war it did not seek, but could not avoid. This was not a colonial war. This was industrial warfare on a scale never seen before. Britain mobilized the empire itself. Indian troops fought in Europe. Australian and New Zealand forces landed at Gallipoli. African colonies supplied manpower and resources. The empire functioned as a single war machine. And yet, the cost was staggering. Millions dead, an entire generation scarred. Victory came, but it was a hollow one. Britain emerged victorious, but financially exhausted. Its dominance depended increasingly on borrowed money. Between the wars, Britain attempted to hold its empire together. Nationalist movements grew louder. India demanded self-rule. Ireland broke away. The illusion of permanence faded. Britain responded with reform where possible, repression where necessary. But the world had learned something crucial from Britain itself. Empires could be challenged. The Second World War pushed Britain beyond its limits. This was total war. Cities bombed, supply lines threatened. Colonies strained to sustain the effort. Britain fought with courage and discipline, but it could not fight alone. The United States became the arsenal of democracy. The empire survived, but only with external support. This marked a turning point. Britain won the war, but lost the ability to dominate the world alone. After 1945, the empire began to dissolve rapidly. India gained independence. Colonies across Asia and Africa followed, not because Britain was suddenly weak, but because the cost of control exceeded its value. The world had changed. Nationalism replaced imperial loyalty. Global institutions replaced imperial rule. Britain adapted once more. This time, by letting go. Britain did not conquer the world through sheer numbers. It conquered through systems. Naval logistics, industrial organization, administrative control, adaptability. When those systems gave Britain an advantage, it dominated. When others mastered the same systems, dominance faded. Behind every map was suffering. Forced labor. Famines exacerbated by policy. Cultures reshaped. Borders drawn without a regard for people. Empire created wealth, but not evenly. Its legacy remains contested, complex, and deeply human. Britain's rise and fall offers a timeless lesson in war and power. Power is not eternal. It must be maintained, adapted, and justified. Strategy without humility leads to collapse. Systems without humanity breed resistance. Empires rise not only by winning wars, but by understanding when wars can no longer be won. Britain conquered 25% of the world, but its greatest achievement was not conquest. It was adaptation, and its greatest failure was believing adaptation alone could sustain dominance forever. History does not belong to the strongest. It belongs to those who understand change and act before change overwhelms them. That is the true legacy of the British Empire.